Hey, joining us on the line is Brian Kilmeade. He is author of the brand new book, Sam Houston and the Alamo Avengers. This is just the latest in Brian's series of historical books. It's really a fantastic piece of work. Brian, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Ben, it's my honor. Are you kidding?
So why don't we just jump right into the content of the book? So there are a lot of people who actually don't know all that much about Texas history. If you're outside the state of Texas, I grew up in California, obviously. You just kind of know that Texas is part of the Union, but you don't know much about the history of Texas, how it was a republic before it was ever part of the United States. So what your book is about basically the battle that decided that Texas was going to be independent of Mexico, but it starts off before that. So what exactly happened to lead up to the battle between the people who would become Texans and the government of Mexico?
And Ben, you were kind enough to have me on in past books. And the one thing I try to pattern these books off is the Rocky movies. And what's the best thing about the Rocky movies? They flash back to the previous movies to start the next one. So I thought, man, I got the idea about doing Sam Houston because as you study Andrew Jackson, he keeps referencing 21-year-old Sam Houston with tremendous potential, where they saw so much of each other in each other. And I thought, wow, I have an idea. If I get this passed and we decide to do this, because I'm also doing this series for Fox Nation called What Made America Great. So I was doing an Alamo feature anyway. I go, if there's enough here, I know how I'm starting it. I'm going to flash back to the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, 1814, where this reckless, courageous, 6'3" blue-eyed young officer fighting under Andrew Jackson, feared nothing. I got wounded 3 times in the span of 3 hours. And after he got hit the first time, they brought him to the sick bay. Then Jackson wanted to finish off the battle that night. Go, can anyone here fight? Up comes Houston again. Jackson's like, this guy's amazing. So the first guy over the wall on the last surge gets killed. Sam Houston gets over the wall and gets hit right away again. So what he does is he should have died. He survived. And he learned a couple of things. Number one, he saw how fragile our country is because he watched Washington burned to the ground. And he thought our country was here forever. It was going to be this superpower. And he said, oh, my God, how close do we get to losing? Number two, he learned courage is great, but courage has got to be calculated. And I go, that's the premise. Now tell the story. And the other story is, Ben, I was ready. I don't know if you've ever experienced blowback. Kidding. Of course you do. So I read a book about when you write a book about Texas from the American perspective, everyone's going to say, oh, you don't understand. We stole Texas. That's wrong. As you know, Jefferson and Jackson among the two esteemed people who believed it came in the Louisiana Purchase and that we never should have given it up in exchange for Florida, that, they did longitude and latitude, not states. And they said it was clear as day that that was it. But we just doubled the size of our country. We didn't know how we were going to handle this. It was a bit of a surprise, as you know, and we didn't know how we were going to handle that. So no one really got caught up in it. But it always burned Jackson because he felt like he won Florida. And Houston and him and James K. Polk and Buchanan and Martin Van Buren used to sit on the Hermitage porch and talk about how they were going to get Texas. And then Houston goes down there throughout his life, ups and downs, up and down. He just ends up being the 40-something-year-old at the perfect time, at the perfect place, with the right experience to take this group of tough guys who were determined to avenge the loss of the Alamo, where everybody was killed, including 2 of the most famous Americans, Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, and avenge it in a matter of months. And I thought, the Alamo, because you and I grew up in New York, you're in California, they gave us 1 day on the Alamo in social studies. So I said, let's go beyond. And Ken Burns was the one who told me, he goes, this is lightly reported outside Texas. He said, you do Battle of San Jacinto, where they actually won in 17 minutes, finished them off in 2 hours, and then caught Santa Anna. The most remarkable victory you can imagine. And people will tell you, I never heard of that story. And most people told me, I never heard of this story.
That's exactly right. I mean, again, the book is really detailed and it gives all of this background. So let's start with the Battle of the Alamo. So everybody remember the Alamo, but people don't actually know what that means, what happened at the Alamo, why were Americans even there in the first place, and what was their relationship with the government of Mexico and the relationship of the government of Mexico with the government of Spain. So what's the backstory there?
So Moses Austin, around 1820, I don't know if you know, when you read about history, it's amazing how the rich become poor almost overnight. Bankruptcy from everything to bankruptcy. So Moses Austin loses everything and says, just like the entrepreneurial spirit, Texas got all this promise. No one's there. Comanche Indians have so many people in that region afraid to go there. So why don't I go down and try to cut a deal with the local Spanish authority? And through fits and starts, he finally gets a deal by true luck. But he gets sick on the way back, and he gets sick. And one of his lasting wishes was that Stephen F. Austin come out of the North and go and take his mission of settling and fulfilling this deal of you belong to Spain, you belong to eventually Mexico. You take the land, you work the land, no slaves, no taxes for 10 years, and become a Catholic. Okay. So everyone comes down there to this wonderful land called Texas. We now call Texas, and they start building up. And they start prospering like never before, more than anything south of them and as strong as anything north of them. And people keep coming down because, believe it or not, Ben, even though we were the New World, people wanted a new world after the New World. They wanted a fresh start after a fresh start. And as far as I could tell, there was no social safety net. Nancy Pelosi wasn't writing guaranteed checks for not doing anything. There was rumor of a PPP program, but I have not got confirmation on that. So they actually went down there with a wagon, a rake, and a gun. And they said, that's all I need. That's the attitude of Texas. What I found so interesting is the way the movies characterize these people is exactly right. It's not a freak. It's not a mischaracterization. These people were tough as nails. They demanded nothing. They all looked out for each other. And it grows and prospers. And everything would have been fine. Separate from America, they would do it until Santa Anna takes over, Mexico gets its independence. And this guy go, the freedom and liberty, not in 100 years will my people be ready for that. The Texians are my people. So little by little, he was going to let them know, no elections. There'll be a lot of taxes right away, and no due process. Doesn't really fly for Americans. Game on, few skirmishes, leads up to the Alamo. And when you're 180 guys and you hold off 3,000, a standing trained army for 13 days, you get yourself, you live in infamy. Especially knowing that they all died and they stared death in the face and they stood strong and together. So that's what did it. But then what happened after when a Battle of San Jacinto kind of rewarded their valor.
So let's talk about the Battle of San Jacinto, which again is the forgotten battle. Everybody remembers the name of the Alamo. Very few people outside of Texas know the Battle of San Jacinto at all, but it is one of the great American military victories. It ends up being an American military victory only later when America actually annexes Texas, but we'll get to that in just a second. So what exactly happened at the Battle of San Jacinto?
So what happened is Houston, and I actually did this in the TV special, this tree is still there. Houston's driving everyone crazy because he keeps going backwards, including the provisional Texas government. They're like, we paid you and hired you to fight. All you do is run backwards. They call it the runaway scrape. You know why? Because he knew they weren't ready. He knew they weren't trained. He also knew they were outnumbered. So he's looking for momentum. He's looking for organization. He literally was running and hiding. And he was doing what my opinion, he was doing what the Russians did to Napoleon and Hitler. And they just burned everything. And they burned everything and retreated. And the Mexican army was running out of they were running out of supplies. The quartermaster didn't exist. The medical team didn't exist. He didn't care about his people, nor did he care about feeding them. And as they got sucked in deeper and deeper, they got further and further from their supply lines. They thought they'd live off the villages, but no. Houston took the villages, took the town, he went backwards till they get to this famous oak tree. It's a wishway tree, and it goes up like a V. And one branch went towards our border, American border, the other branch towards San Jacinto. And the rumor is that he says, I'm going. He always said he was going. Others say that his men forced him to go. So he goes and reports for battle. As usual, Napoleon of the West came out. And Santa Anna's men got there. And they had a few skirmishes. And it looked like they were going to have a standoff. And you go back to the place. It's still there. It looks exactly the same. But Santa Anna made a few mistakes. He backed himself up to water. No one can swim. They blew up the bridge. There was no way out. And he also said, if we don't fight in the morning, we don't fight at all. Houston gets up at 10, war council meeting at 12, fights at 2:30. Santa Anna's people had marched all night. They were sleeping and they had their guns in a pile. So when they mount the charge, and Houston, the biggest guy there in front, so courageous, gets shot off a horse twice. When they get within these lines, Ben, and without a single shot being fired on them, they go over the top. They finish him off in 17 minutes, crushed him in 2 hours. And instead of killing Santa Anna, when they got him the next day because he dressed like a peasant and ran, and they found him, they didn't kill him. They didn't torture him. They said, okay, we're going to treat you like a prisoner of war. Get your letterhead out, like you should have treated our guys at the Alamo. They sign over Texas and basically signs over a provision that says, send the reinforcements back. So basically, they won the war. Sam Houston goes to Louisiana and heals from his wounds, comes back, becomes the first president, the first governor.
So immediately in the aftermath of this obviously doesn't solve all of Texas's problems. Texas is now an independent republic. It is not part of the United States formally. And later, when Texas seeks admission to the United States, it actually leads to this massive controversy in which Abraham Lincoln, among others, is actually against bringing Texas into the Union because he's very much afraid that it's really the southern states that want Texas to become part of America so they can have another slaveholding state because Texas would be open to slavery. So maybe you can talk about the controversy that attended Texas actually becoming part of the United States as opposed to remaining an independent republic on the American continent.
I was surprised how little I thought I knew about leading up to the Civil War that I didn't. And this is one of those stories. It throws up the free state, slave state thing. There were people like Andrew Jackson, Sam Houston, Lincoln, famous people and not so famous people, Seward, that feared that we were going to have this Civil War and wanted to do everything to avoid it. People thought Lincoln was, a racist for not pushing when he became president right away. He said, no, I'm trying not to form a civil war. There's a way to fade slavery out, to get it out. We know it's wrong, but you have the half of the country who says it's right and half doesn't, and your goal is to keep us together. So every time there would be a mission, another state, another territory was going for statehood, it was like, how would that line up with the balance of power? So for 9 years, because they could not heal this controversy and get a unanimous vote, Texas became its own country, constantly in danger of Mexico taking it back. They had to form their own navy, create their own security, create their own alliances. And in a typical Trumpian-like move, Sam Houston courting and vice versa the British to come in, and British go, hey, here you got a problem. I'd love to get back in there. If you want, I'll take care of you. I'll provide the Navy and security. Mexico will never bother you again. And why don't we work out a trade relationship right away? Well, that really spurred the movement of Texas as a state, because the last thing people want is an additional footprint of Britain in the southern part of this hemisphere, which was already, they were still up in Oregon. So he said, yeah, guys, I'm probably going to go with Britain unless you guys make a decision soon. They made a decision, and 9 years later, they were part of the country.
So what do you make of all the critiques, obviously, of Texas becoming part of the country? As you know, the revisionist history of Texas is that it was an imperialist move by basically white Europeans to take over indigenous territory or Mexican territory. And there are many people in sort of the Howard Zinnified arenas of American history who think that Texas really should not be part of the United States. Similarly, they think a lot of the Southwest should not be part of the United States. In the process of writing the book, what do you make of those criticisms?
Well, Ben, first off, we back up. They don't think we should be part of the United States. They don't think the United States should exist. So there's nothing that we could ever do to convince them of this. This is what I would say. There's this thing called facts. Stephen F. Austin was a master deal maker. He wanted to stay as a province of Mexico. And even though they changed power and he watched the independence take place, he went down to cut a deal. When he says, listen, this is the deal my dad signed that I've been living up to the letter of the law. The one thing they didn't do, in all honesty and candor, they said no slaves. They did have slaves down there. Not a great number. They were there. But having said that, that didn't bother Santa Anna at all. And basically, they had their own slaves. People who were basically the serfs. They had no chance of any type of semblance of making a living education. But having said that, he went down there to cut a deal and go, we do not want independence. We just want to be an independent province of the Mexico Confederacy, or whatever you want to call it. They put him in jail. They said, you will listen to me. You will do what we say. And then they're watching what they do to the other provinces that started rising up. They were killing everybody to send a message to the Texians to wise up and get along. But they didn't. They doubled and tripled down. And the early skirmishes were victories for the Texians. They take the Alamo, and then they lost the Alamo. And he wanted to again send a message. He thought by killing everybody that he would send a message and get everybody else to quit. That might have worked in some provinces, but not this one. Then they said, we're going to fight for this. We're going to fight for our own independence. They wrote up using the template of American independence and the Constitution of our Constitution. And these were 99% Americans and some very loyal Tianos. And they fought hard and they became their own country. That's just a fact. And Stephen F. Austin came out of prison and came back and he goes, I know I've been telling you, we got to stay with our deal. Not anymore. Game on. This is a new regime in there. We can't deal with these guys.
The book is Sam Houston and the Alamo, Avengers, the Texas Victory That Changed American History by Brian Kilmeade. It's a fantastic read. So, Brian, what do you think has been the lasting impact, aside from obviously Texas becoming part of the country? Texas has a different view of itself than many other states across the United States. Like as I say, I'm from California, born and bred. You think of yourself as an American first and a Californian second. When I speak with Texans, that isn't always the case. There are a lot of Texans who sort of think of themselves as we're Texans first and then Americans, and that's sort of the order in which it goes. What sort of independent mentality do you think has been bred in Texas because of the origins of Texas?
This is, in my opinion only, is that the reason why I wasn't going to do this, I was just going to try to do a series on Fox Nation. I do this thing, What Made America Great, and I got 21 features done. And I was going to just do it and just like stay in the area and do it. And they were so into me telling this story. And then what I did is, Ben, I think you could appreciate this. I would send them excerpts as I was writing it. And I would give them a few bucks and I say, guys, go over this. Make sure this is your story. And I find that they are prideful, but not separatists. They're not like we're better than America. They just have pride in their original background. That's what struck me. I had just the opposite impression as a New Yorker going through school and whatever I'm doing with my career. But when you dive into it and meet the historians and the relatives, when I was on tour, we must have had 11 stops when you used to be able to do a book tour. I had 11 stops in Texas. I did not have a line that didn't have 10 or 15 people related to somebody in that battle or someone who was one of the first families to get there. But they didn't say, look how good I am. America's lucky to have me. We're part of the American story, but we had a story before we became part of America. No arrogance, just pride. I have not felt any differently from the thousands of people I met there and the expert and scholars that helped me.
So I wanted to ask you more broadly about writing history. So you've written a bunch of books on history at this point, and they're all fantastic. You should check all of them out. Brian Kilmeade's stuff is really terrific. I don't sense that a Pulitzer is anywhere in your future. I have a feeling that may have less to do with the quality of your books than it has to do with the quality of the Pulitzer at this point. They gave the Pulitzer, as you know, this year in commentary to the head of the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah-Jones, for a revisionist history of the United States that essentially argues that the United States was founded on slavery and evil, and that pretty much everything in modern America is fruit of the poisonous tree. As somebody who studies history and writes history, what do you make of the 1619 Project?
Couldn't be more disappointed, especially the coverage you got. I think that it prompted my next project, to be honest. But I just say I'm just astounded on how much people seem to be invested in running down America. And not only say we're not exceptional, we might be the worst. And that's another example of it. No one would ever excuse slavery. No one would ever say, hey, on second thought, it was a good idea. No, not in a million. It's astounding to think that the smartest people around that did so many brilliant things, that changed the course of human history, they were the beacon of freedom and gave the idea to so many others to have this form of government and made people demand this type of freedom and liberty, could possibly rationalize this behavior. But to think America was built on it is totally wrong. What I think the one thing is great is we should look back on it, understand it, huge mistake. As George Bush said, it's the original sin. But we've done a lot of good along the way, and still we were built on a solid foundation. I believe our Constitution was not live up to. It's not that our Constitution was lacking. And none other than Frederick Douglass believed the same thing. He said, look, in the beginning, I thought, wow, this country wrote slavery in. The more he studied it, the more he looked at it. He said, no, it's up to this country to live up to their founding fathers' ideals, even though some had slaves. The other thing I found out, too, is we didn't have the market corner on slaves. It wasn't our idea, especially there were more in Brazil than anywhere else and around the globe, not to excuse the behavior. But we are so much more than a country that had slaves that I just didn't know where to start. And the reason why I wouldn't get a Pulitzer is because I don't deserve it. I'm looking to write to a mass audience that is so busy and is so diverse and has so many other things going on. So they'd be perfectly comfortable answering the question when asked at a cocktail party or a tailgate. Are we an exceptional nation? I want you to be able to say yes, and here's why. And that's why a slice of history told simply, quickly. And if you want to know more, I'll tell you exactly where to go. But to me, I'm looking to broaden people out the way I broaden out. I learn a ton in my research. And that's what I want. I have more people come up to me, great educations, and say, I've never done that. Or people say, I didn't go to college, but man, this makes me wish I did, because I could learn this. This is what I would have majored in.
So, Brian, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, about some of the news of the day. Obviously, COVID-19 continues to dominate the news, and obviously been raked up and down by critics, particularly of the left, for advocating for easing lockdowns, for moving toward a more rational system that is more sustainable over time. What do you make of the current debate that's going on in the country over the sustained lockdown over COVID-19? And what do you think are rational policies people should be pursuing right now?
So one thing that you do better than anybody else, you see the common arguments and you go deeper and try to take a different nuance to it. But I would have to say, and I think you might back me up on this, this is the most unique argument yet to date. I mean, think about this. We're in a country of freedom and liberty. We all recognize that COVID is a danger. We all recognize the nuances of it. You got to wear a mask, social distance. Okay, no fighting. Okay, you want to do it, mask? Okay, fine. You want me to keep 20 feet around? Okay, fine. When it comes to the workplace, you want plexiglass or you want the cubicles got to be, okay, fine. But when it comes to opening up and the pace we open up, it has everything to do with how quick our country will recover. If we don't recover quickly, then you want a world in which China rules? Literally, time is not on our side. Time is not a luxury. Safely, maturely, moving towards opening up these states should be the goal. I talked to Dan Patrick today on the radio, and he says, listen, I want to do everything as safe as anything. He's 70 years old, and he said, I'm probably susceptible to somebody that might get it and might not have a positive outcome. I'm willing to take my chances by doing the precautions, but at the same time, it's lazy to sit in your state house and shut it down. It's easy to do, and it's lazy. Get out, use your mayors, walk down Main Street, find out why we can't open up the car wash. Why can't I open up the sports store? Why can't I get bait and tackle? Why cannot get 4 people in a boat? Why can't I play golf and not tennis? No one has answers to that. That doesn't mean I don't look at the virus as real. I mean, people have to have a quality of life and a chance of economic survival. Do you know anyone that owns a restaurant?
Several people. Yep.
How hard
they're
they
getting
work?
killed right now. Yep.
But do you know how hard they work? Even on the best day, they work 60, 70 hours a week. It's constant on a treadmill. How dare we take that away from a virus we had nothing to do with? Give them the chance to make it safe. Open up, have a criteria, open up and do it. The Dolphins told you how to populate a stadium. Don't tell the other 31 teams can't get people in that stadium. The Dolphins already came up with their thing. Do you know baseball put together a genius system for sitting in the dugout, where to stand, where to go, how to go to 2 trainers, who's going to be in touch with whom in the hotel? It's genius. They said, we want our industry to thrive. This is the only way. To shut it down and to yell at people and criticize people just because we want to open it up responsibly is too stupid for me to even entertain. I've had it with that. It's destroying the country.
Yeah, Brian, one of the things that's been astonishing to me is how this has really become such a politicized issue, because you figure that probably 80% of Americans, 85% of Americans are on board with this basic idea that if we wear masks and are not infecting other people, that if we're staying away from other people, if we're doing responsible things, then being allowed to go out to work or being allowed to be on the beach and be 7 feet away from somebody else and sit on a blanket and eat. Like, these are not controversial things, and we all want to be responsible. And yet this has become very, very political. And it occurred to me that one of the reasons it's become political is because there are so many people who actually want America fundamentally changed. And this is where things get really ugly. Not because I'm accusing these people of having sort of ulterior motives for the lockdown, but because the lockdown tends to support the idea that America requires fundamental change. You saw this from President Obama over the weekend when he gave a speech basically suggesting that the response to coronavirus demonstrates that America has always had deep and systemic flaws, and that therefore we need to fundamentally remake the country along that basis. That comes with a pretty dark view of American history and of the American present that is just not supportable by fact. And yet this virus becomes sort of the justification for trying to remake the system that people wanted 3 months ago before COVID didn't even hit America.
And Ben, I'm sure you know AOC let that slip out. She thought it was great. I'll paraphrase. She came out and said it was great that we weren't using oil and gas, that we had a chance to get automatic income, and that people really resent not being able to work. And only in America can you think it's sacrifice not to work. I'm proud of that statement about America, because we want the honor of working towards our goals, pursuit of happiness. And she quickly went down on that. She said, I better not say that out loud. Oil and gas industry brought to its knees. She was basically high-fiving everyone she saw.
Yeah, it's all really, really disturbing stuff. I think that it's good that most Americans are coming to a consensus, and I'm amused by the divide between the American people and their politicians when it comes to this sort of stuff. And even what the American people do and what the American people say. You'll see 80% approval ratings for Andrew Cuomo and his lockdowns, and then you'll see everybody in upstate New York basically ignoring his lockdowns, and people in the middle of Brooklyn ignoring his lockdowns at the same time. They're saying, oh, we love what Andrew Cuomo is doing. The media divide over this thing is not really reflective of the behavioral divide we saw in New Jersey today. There were a bunch of folks who went out to the gym, and the police came, and instead of shutting it down, they basically said, we know you're technically violating the law. Have a nice day. And they took off. And meanwhile, Phil Murphy is saying that they're going to continue to shut down until the end of time. So it seems to me that in the end, the American people, the spirit of independence in the American people is going to remain strong. And we do trust one another not to be completely stupid about how we handle this virus, which of course is the way that we actually should treat one another as sentient human beings capable of making individual decisions.
True. And there's going to be people that violate it, just like there are people that are going to drink and drive, just like when people say you got to be off the beach at sunset and the best day, some are going to sneak on. There's going to be no difference with this. And what happens is the cops, again, are in the horrible position of going up to people and saying, don't sunbathe. Keep walking on the beach. Don't stop. My goodness, how much pressure do you put on law enforcement? We're not going to have any policemen left. Because, of course, people turn around and go, really? I can't sit on a towel in the sand and breathing in fresh air because I'm out of my living room? And they don't want to do it.
Yeah, Brian Kilmeade. The book is Sam Houston and the Alamo Avengers. Definitely go check it out today. Pick up copies of all of his other history books as well. He's got George Washington's Secret Six and a bunch of other. Brian, really appreciate the time, and good luck with the paperback release of the book, which, of course, was already a New York Times bestseller when it was in hardcover.
And not only do I love your podcast, I like it as the radio show as well, Ben. So congratulations on all the success.
Hey, thanks so much, Brian.
Go get him.